Good afternoon, morning, day, evening, and night, wherever you may be in the world. We are going to be giving ourselves a couple minutes for everyone to slowly start trickling in, and we'll be getting this party started. Welcome, welcome, everyone. We're just giving everyone till about 3 minutes past, about another minute and a half, and then we'll be getting this party started. Want to get everyone up ample time to be able to join and get settled before we get the ball rolling. All right. It looks like our numbers are kind of leveling out, not seeing a bunch more joining at the same time. So I say we go ahead and get the party started. So welcome, welcome everyone. We are here today to talk about the next gen networking and how can we really enrich the experience within Nautobot 2.0 and what have we really done to really empower our network engineers and operators to be able to achieve truly meaningful outcomes within network automation. Some quick little housekeeping items before I get into the agenda. As we're going through on the webinar, if you have any questions, please make sure you drop them into the Q&A section. So when you mouse over, you should see a Q&A button. Click on the Q&A section. Do not send a direct message. Send it through the Q&A. And we'll be making sure that we can respond to them as quick as we can during the webinar, and some we may be keeping for a live response at the end. We will be recording the webinar, and a link to the recording will be sent to your email and will also be uploaded to YouTube and published to our social media accounts within the coming days to week after the webinar itself. Also, we have a blog that was released this morning on Nautobot 2.0. We'll be sharing the link to the blog at the end of the webinar. And so with some housekeeping items out of the way, let's talk about our agenda. So we'll be doing our typical introductions. I'm sure if you've been on some of our webinars in the past, you're probably familiar with John and myself. A brief Nautobot overview. Then we're going to start diving into some of the changes and what's coming in on Nautobot version 2. And there's some other sneak peek items I think John has hidden in there. Then, of course, a wonderful live demo, Q&A, and we'll wrap it up. So, quick introductions. I'm Jeremy White. I'm the Nautobot app ecosystem tech lead for Networks of Code. So anything on the app side or SDKs or whatnot, all are from my domain, and my partner in crime is John Anderson, the product owner for Nautobot. And on that note, John, I'll hand it over to you for you to take over.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, excited to be here today yet again, talking about Nautobot. So for anyone that is not familiar or, would like a quick recap, so Nautobot is Network to Code's network automation and network source of truth platform. So at its base, we are a network source of truth platform where we consolidate all of the data that is vital to the automation needs of an organization's network. So, things like tracking devices, IPAM assets, as well as things like connections of interfaces and so forth. Really, any of the data that you can think of that would be necessary to automate a network goes into this network source of truth. And then built on top of that, because the data is very key to everything that we do, but built on top is our network automation platform. So Nautobot itself is an extensible system with a plugin based architecture where we can build various applications on top that service a variety of network automation specific use cases. And there's tons of apps that Network to Code supports in the open source realm, as well as through our professional services engagements. But the platform is also open for end users to build sorts of solutions on their own as well. So today we'll be talking about Nautobot version 2. This is by far the biggest development undertaking that we've had since Nautobot's first release a few years ago. There's a number of user-facing features here that folks can be excited about, but underneath the hood, we've made a lot of changes to the core platform itself that is really going to enable our teams to do a lot more going forward. So we'll talk today about some of those user-facing features and some of the underlying changes if you are app developers or job authors, some of the things to look out for there, as well as plans for upgrades and migrations and so forth. But the things that we'll be talking about today are the generic role model, the significant changes that have been made to the entirety of the IPAM data model to service a variety of use cases and fix some longstanding issues that folks have seen at scale there. We've got some improvements to our location data modeling. So, tracking things like physical sites, but also logical locations within the network as well. We've made some pretty extensive improvements to the way that we do data import and export capabilities within the platform. And I'll talk about that as well as some future plans there built again on the basis of what we've done in the significant overhaul that is Nautobot version 2. And then I'll talk about the improvements to the user interface that are coming by the end of this year in our next iteration of the version 2 release train 2.1. And I'll talk about the specifics of that coming forward. And then we'll also talk about some of the other major improvements, things changing within jobs and so forth, some REST API things to look out for and so forth. But let's jump right into some of those more exciting features, what's new in Nautobot version 2. So first up is the generic role model. So if you are an existing Nautobot user, coming into version 2, you'll know that we have a variety of models that are used to track various role states within the platform. So things like device roles that describe what is the intent of this device? Why does it exist on the network? What is its purpose? The same for racks as well. And then there's a variety of use cases for IPAM roles. So, what does this prefix do? Why is an IP address, assigned in a type of way, right? So what we've done is realize that we're really trying to do the same thing with those different sets of role models. And so we want to combine their intent into one central model. And if you are an existing Nautobot user, you'll notice that this is very similar to the status model, where we have central management of the values, and then we describe the ways in which those specific roles in this case can be used. So whether a particular role applies to a device or a prefix or an IP address, etc. So this really helps to normalize the data model and improve the overall management and so forth. But of course, you as the end user get to have full control over what those specific roles are and what their meanings are as well. So, you can do things like, describing primary and secondary use cases and not have to worry about duplicate meanings between different sets of use cases and so forth. And a point of note that I will continue to reiterate through all of this is while these are some significant changes in the platform from version 1 to version 2, We've taken great strides to make sure that users that are upgrading make sure that all of their data is carried over automatically. So we've spent a lot of time on making sure that data is migrated properly and automatically for you through the upgrade to Nautobot version 2. Next up is the revamped IPAM data model. So we've done a number of different things here. First and foremost is the introduction of a brand new model called namespaces. And the basis of what a namespace is it is used to define the uniqueness constraints for address space. So previously, you could achieve this by, tracking VRF instances in various ways. And while that gets you so far, there's some contention between the realities of the way that we deploy the network from an address space standpoint and the way that we want to track that data for IPAM management. So we've taken a step back and realized that what would be most appropriate here is a kind of higher level meaning in this form of a namespace. So, you can imagine maybe MSP type environments, or if we have cookie cutter types of network segments that we deploy copies of throughout the network, those can all be created as the independent namespaces. And within those namespaces, we can have duplicate or overlapping address space now and have a much more reasonable way to track that data without alerts of duplicate address space for these valid types of use cases and so forth. Next up is changes to the way that parent-child relationships happen within the hierarchical nature of things like prefixes and IP addresses. So we have created a concrete relationship between parent and child prefixes and the IP addresses that they contain. And what this really helps is, one, performance concerns in larger data sets. So if you are a large enterprise with a massive address space and you're wishing to track correctly all of your prefixes and IP addresses, you should see some significant performance improvements as a result of this. Previously, these relationships, to be able to show on the right-hand side of the screenshot here that hierarchy, that would have to be calculated on the fly when we pull that data out of the database. And so that comes at a performance penalty. And in cases where we did have overlapping or duplicate address space, there could be some confusion or inconsistencies in the way that you would see that data actually represented in a way that may not actually be right in the first place. So in this change, we correct all of that and make those relationships very explicit, but also providing valuable user experience in the way that we manage that data. So again, it all comes back to the namespace that contains a set of addresses, a prefix, and then the IP addresses that are associated to those prefixes and so forth. Next up would be the removal of the aggregate model. So previously, the aggregate model was more or less used to track the top level address space that we as an organization cared about, and we might attribute that to a regional registry that granted us that address space and so forth. We're not removing the intent or the ability to track those things. We're just getting rid of the need to have a totally separate model to do that. So now a aggregate would be considered the top level prefix nodes within the standard prefix hierarchy. And we still have the ability to associate those to regional registries and so forth. We just don't have to track those as a totally separate model now. And that comes back, and that comes from some direct feedback from users about ways that they would like to track address space. The types have been consolidated, so we have containers, networks, and pools, and those now go into a more consistent and predictable utilization calculation logic for things like knowing how much space is used or available within a given /16/24 network or so forth. So containers contain other networks. Networks would be prefixes that are actually deployed and configured on interfaces. And then pools, would be things like DHCP scopes and so forth, right? And we've got some plans to do additional data modeling with IPAM in the future, things, like IP ranges and so forth, and especially in support of the firewall modeling that we've been doing in the open source space as well. But I will note the last thing that we've got here is with some of these changes, especially with the use cases around duplicate and overlapping address space, you now have the ability to assign IP addresses to multiple interfaces. So, this really helps to consolidate use cases around Anycast, or again, places where, we might have valid need to, deploy duplicate or overlapping IPs, right? And now we don't have to do things like create duplicate IP address records within the system. We can have one single record, as we, appropriately would from a management standpoint, but be able to properly associate that IP address to the multiple interfaces across various devices that it's actually deployed on. So lots of changes there. We're really excited to see the feedback from folks using this in the real world. But we'll move on here. So just a quick screenshot here and a little bit of a preview of some of the UI work that I'll demo a little bit later. But this is looking at the IP address list here, and you can get a sense for the namespace assignment and so forth for all of the changes in the IPAM data model. And I will talk about this button up here for find and merging duplicate IPs. This is a tool that, as a result of migrating data over from Nautobot 1 into Nautobot 2, we've got a series of tools that are available to you to help you clean up data where we might technically be able to migrate it, but maybe because of issues with the existing data model, there wasn't a good way to properly model something, a particular use case. And so that may lead us to create potentially incorrect data in the older data model that now we have a chance to properly model. And so we want to be able to identify those cases and clean up that data. So we've got a series of really helpful tools. This is one example of those. Next up would be changes that we've got to our location model. So first and foremost, we're consolidating the location models that are available within the network source of truth. So previously we had 3 models. That was the site, the region, and the location model. We're consolidating site and region. They will go away in Nautobot 2. And the location model will be the sole way to reference or model location hierarchies within Nautobot. It is quite powerful. So it's primarily comprised of 2 models. So there's locations and location types. The location type dictates the actual hierarchy, but it also does things like tell us what types of objects can we associate to certain levels within the hierarchy. So maybe we want devices to be associated to only certain parts of the hierarchy, and then maybe prefixes can be associated to other sets of the hierarchy. But that allows us as the organization, because we get to define whatever this hierarchy is. It's not forced upon you that you must use some set of hierarchy that comes out of the box in the system. But that allows you as the organization to fully dictate that and the constraints of the type of data that you want to associate there. And again, a point of reiteration, we are removing the site and the region model, but we are fully migrating all of that data over for you. So if you did have a region hierarchy that you set up in Nautobot 1, we will wind up replicating that hierarchy for you in this new location scheme. And then if you wanted to change that or whatever, you do have that capability, and I'll show that a little bit in the demo a little bit later today. But just know that your data will come over for you automatically when you upgrade. Next up is some changes to data import and export, and I'll go through a couple of notes here. Some of these changes are in the 2.0 release of Nautobot, and some of these are coming in the 2.1 release, which I won't spoil too much of the surprise, but that is entering public beta today and will be generally available by the end of the year. So in December, the 2.1 release will reach general availability. So first and foremost, so in 2.0, we did a lot of work to make sure that when you do data import and export, the fields and the formats of those fields are kept consistent. So if you're doing a CSV export of some data, and then you want to import that data maybe to another Nautobot instance, so maybe you're going from a lab to a production environment or vice versa, something like that, right? We make sure that the headers in those files and the format of the data is consistent between those imports and exports. What this is going to allow us to do in the future, so this isn't here today, but what this will allow us to do in the future is round tripping of that exported data for the purpose of bulk updates. So, you can imagine if I've got thousands of devices that maybe I want to export and change a couple of attributes very quickly in something like Excel. and then export that file and then re-import it into the system, we could use the basis of what we've got here to treat those as updates and be able to do that very quickly. So that is something that is on our roadmap and will be coming in the future. Something that is in the 2.1 release is we are actually doing CSV and export template exports via an asynchronous system provided job now. So that means that that's happening in the background, and it doesn't consume the foreground process. So if you had larger data sets that you were trying to do these exports with in the past, when you click the export button, you would just kind of sit there and wait. And depending on how much data there was, the system may potentially time out on you, and that's very bad user experience. So what we've done to correct that is do this data processing in the background here. And then you can, as the user, can go off and do something else, right? You can go do something else in the system. And then when the file is available for download, you can come back and actually download that from the user interface. For any job authors out there, I will talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but you may be able to read between the lines here. What's actually enabling this under the hood is the ability for jobs to now generate files and have the ability for users to download those files as job outputs from the job results view. So that's very exciting for to enable a lot of reporting use cases and so forth, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. And throughout all of this, you may now be wondering, okay, this seems like some pretty big changes. We're very excited about them, of course. But what I've talked about a lot of so far today is changes to Nautobot Core. And because we're that extensible automation platform, we've got a number of solutions in terms of Nautobot apps that are publicly available for your use. And many of our customers do use quite a number of these apps. And so from an upgrade standpoint, you probably want to know and make sure that if you were to upgrade your Nautobot instance today, that these apps are compatible, and that is the case. So all of the primary applications that Network to Code supports in the open source, Nautobot.org out on GitHub, or any of our customer supported apps, those are fully compatible with Nautobot version 2 today. So you can go and upgrade your instance and pull down the versions that are compatible of these apps and be off to the races. So that's definitely very exciting. And that shows Network to Code's commitment to the entire ecosystem of Nautobot. It's not just the core platform, it is the entire Nautobot automation ecosystem that surrounds it that we want to make sure that everyone has a good experience with. So some of the other smaller updates that I'll go through here. So job changes. There have been some fundamental things to the machinery of how jobs operate. And if you're unfamiliar with jobs, this is the ability to do ad hoc automation scripting and have those scripts kind of consumed within Nautobot and have a nice user interface for things like forms and so forth, data input, and then have a central location where that automation can be executed within the platform. But these are just Python programs that basically a network automation engineer can craft and then import into the environment, and now others on the team can execute those automations in the form of jobs. So there's been some changes to the way that logging works with jobs now. So previously there were some custom APIs for the way that you would log data out of a job to get it to a system log, or to get data into the job result in the web UI. This is now all just using Python standard library logging mechanisms, but there's no loss of functionality. You actually gain some, so you're still able to log information to the database to be able to show the user in the web interface, but also provide links to other to data or other objects within the system from that view as well. Underpinning all of the jobs infrastructure is the use of Celery. So jobs are now Celery primitive tasks. And what that is going to enable us to do in the future is more things like workflow support built on top of Celery. So look for some major improvements coming to that later on in the Nautobot roadmap. Simplified job references. So one of the really cool things that Jobs supports is the ability to do job executions over the REST API. So for automation use cases, I want to centralize something that my team has created, and then I can then call that execution via a Python script from some other system over the Nautobot REST API. Referencing these jobs now is just by their name. In the past, you had to go and find the ID of the job. So it's a little bit of a convoluted process. We've greatly simplified that now. You just have to know the name of the automation that you're trying to run, tell Nautobot about that, and it will go and run it for you. And then, as I alluded to earlier, one of the huge things that you can now do with jobs is you can generate and output any generic file that you'd like from a job itself. And those files can then be downloaded by users within the web interface. So that's going to enable some really powerful type of reporting or remediation types of use cases. And we're really excited about that. And of course, you can retrieve those files over the API as well. And that is a 2.1 specific feature that is coming. But again, that's it. Excuse me. 2.1 is in beta today. Enhanced filter field. So we have made some changes. If you are a network automation engineer that's heavily consuming the Nautobot REST API or GraphQL interfaces, we've made some changes to the way that filtering works. Simplified the number of fields that are available because some fields are dual purpose now. They may support the string name representation of a piece of data that you're looking for, or the ID if you happen to know it and want to go that route. So instead of having to track, two different fields for those different purposes, we've tried to consolidate the experience there to be a little more acceptable. Natural key support. So this kind of harkens back to the job reference simplification. So across the board, we have tried to do a better job of having consistency in the way that we can look up data within the system, whether that be over the API or specifically from the ORM for jobs or for plugin authors, with this idea of what we're calling the natural key. So that is a consistent format that you can know and expect across the board, no matter what the model or the data is for anything that you might happen to be doing. Some changes to the REST API. We are removing the brief parameter and replacing it with depth control. So this is actually a pretty neat little thing where you can specify a numeric depth via this depth query parameter, and the API will dynamically return various levels of nested data. So an example of that would be devices have a reference to the location in which they're deployed. And locations on their own have quite a bit of data, even down to the hierarchy of what is that location's parent and grandparent and so forth, right? So with this depth control, I can say if I just want my device and I just want a simple reference to what the location is, like just the location name, I could specify one depth. And if I want to go a little bit deeper, it's like I want the device and I want all of those details of the location, I can specify a deeper depth with this depth parameter, and the API is going to dynamically return that data. So it's kind of a bridge between capabilities within the REST API and GraphQL, if you're familiar with that, without having to go full bore into the GraphQL space. But definitely some very useful functionality here if you are looking for that sort of thing. And then a note about REST API versioning. So in the past, we were hard set to the most compatible version of Nautobot. And what that meant was that newer installs sometimes got a older version of the REST API. And so folks were confused about how to get new functionality that was available in the system. They just had to upgrade that version. So now just know that the default is going to put you on the latest available API version so that you can immediately take advantage of newer features when they start to come out. However, with that change, know that administrators still retain control, that if they need to pin a specific version of the Nautobot API, you still have that capability to do. It's basically just a change in the default behavior that folks have called out in the past. Other than that, the last thing that I will talk about before we jump into some of the demo here is a note about the changes to the web interface. So we have undertaken a pretty significant effort recently to come up with a little bit more modern look and feel for the Nautobot interface. And I'm sure you can note those existing users can note the first, biggest change is that the navigation has moved over to the left-hand side. So hopefully providing a little more modern way to interact with navigation structures. And then some of the color palette has been changed to give it a little bit cleaner look and feel across the board, but you'll get a sense for that as we get into the demo here. So I will call out, so Nautobot 2.1 to be very specific, right? So a lot of what I've shown thus far in these slides is Nautobot 2.0's release, which was released a few months ago and is fully available. You can go and install that in your environments. Nautobot 2.1, these specific features are coming by the end of this year. So this actually, apologies, this should actually say Q4 2023. The beta is out today, and it will ship by the end of December of this year. But things included in here, and I will talk about a little bit in the demo, the external integrations model. So this is a bit of configuration management for the automation platform, where if I'm integrating with an external system, maybe ServiceNow or Infoblox or something like that, right? I've got maybe an SSoT where I'm pulling or pushing data to or from those systems or some other type of integration. I now have a place where I can specify configuration for the connection to those external systems, be it a base API, URL endpoint, connection credentials, extra configuration about that integration. And then I can consume that configuration in a number of ways. Our SSoT framework will have abilities to reference these integrations and so forth. So this is really about, providing a little bit easier of management of the ability to integrate with external systems within the ecosystem. The reskin of the UI, as I mentioned, and will be kind of a center point as we go into the demo here. So I won't spend too much time talking about that now. But we talked a lot about the job created downloadable files. And then the other thing here is the data ownership and provenance. So this is going to be a long-running theme kind of throughout 2024. But the first phase here, this is all about providing kind of enterprise-friendly metadata to the information that we have in the network source of truth. So examples of that would be, from a data ownership perspective, is who is the responsible party for this piece of data? Not necessarily, saying who is responsible for this network device as it exists on the network, but who's supposed to attest to the correctness of this data within the network source of truth. And then provenance, being a term from the enterprise space of, where did this data come from? Did it come from an external system? When was the last time it was synchronized? What are details about that system? And so forth, right? So some of the initial bits within this theme is going to be some of the data that we already have within the changelog, exposing that data in a little more reasonable way. And I'll show that as we get into the interface here. But later down the road, throughout 2024, what's remaining on the roadmap for this is getting down to things like the attribute level of the data, where maybe if I have two SSOTs that are both pulling data for the same model entity within the system, like if I've got maybe like ServiceNow and then some internal system with my organization that I use to populate my device data, I'll be able to attribute, okay, these attributes, like maybe the serial number comes from ServiceNow, but the primary IP comes from this other system that I've got, right? I'll be able to see that within my network source of truth to be able to more quickly track down issues and so forth. So those are kind of our plans for data ownership and provenance the rest of 2024. A little bit of that coming by the end of the year in 2.1. And then this very last point here, the sandbox demo environments, I will be demoing out of those today, but we've made some enhancements there to make sure that we can keep those environments up to date. And those sandbox, I've got some details at the end of the presentation here. Those are publicly available environments for you to go and play with Nautobot at your leisure without having to worry about spinning it up in your environment or anything like that. These are just publicly available. So the work here is just to make sure that we can keep those environments up to date as we continue to iterate through new releases of Nautobot and so forth. But let's jump into the demo here. So first and foremost, this is the new page of Nautobot. You saw this in the screenshot a few moments ago. But let's first jump over to the IPAM space and talk about namespaces, as we mentioned. So when we migrate the system over from an existing install, we will attempt to create a series of namespaces that match the reality of the address space that you've got in your system. If you're a new install, you'll get this global instance. Now, I'll take a step back and realize maybe in some of our environments, if we're not a huge enterprise that deals with massive amounts of overlapping address space, mergers and acquisitions kind of aren't in our purview or anything like that. It's very reasonable that maybe we just need one global namespace and not have to worry about all of this. So that's what this is intended for, right? So it is perfectly reasonable for a lot of folks that maybe this whole namespace concept isn't necessary. And we have modeled this in such a way that when that's the case, you really shouldn't have to worry about it, right? This global namespace will default in the population for dropdowns and things like that, so we don't have to worry about it, right? But for those environments where we do want the namespaces, this is where they are, and this is how we'll be able to manage them. So next up, we can take a look at the prefix list and get a sense for that hierarchy again, and the utilization logic as well. And we can see our container prefixes here, and so this would be an example here of these two 10/8s, where those exist within two different namespaces and so forth, right? So we can then jump over to, let's take a look at IP addresses again. And so, yeah, we can get a sense, all of these exist within our global namespace. But this, find and merge duplicate IPs tool I mentioned again, this is going to be really helpful for folks that are migrating to be able to identify data quality issues that were a result of issues with the previous data model. So we'll move that data over, but then we have an opportunity to use this and some other tools to help correct that data. So what this basically would do is, we can go through this tool to identify, multiple IP addresses that appear to be the same thing, and then we can go and pick which attributes of those we would want to merge together into a single record and so forth. So really helpful from that perspective. So let's go over and we can take a look at something like the device list, and I really just want to give you a sense of the new look and feel that we've got within the application now. And just to note, as we look at things like the device detail view here, we're still working through some of the specific color theming options as we continue through the beta period. So we are very interested in your feedback on that. But I think everyone can hopefully be as excited as we are about this moving forward. But let's go take a look at locations. So as I mentioned, you have the ability to create these different location hierarchies. So this is a location model, and as you can see, these would definitely be individual instances of locations that we've created within the system for the continent of Africa in this case. But if we go and look at location types, we can see the hierarchy that we've actually created here. So what we're actually specifying here is region and site, and then something called data center pod. So what this would actually be akin to would probably be a data set that was migrated from the previous data model where we had regions and sites, and then a location could optionally exist underneath there. And so it would seem that we did have one of those in the past, right? But maybe we want to take this a little bit further and say, let's create a new one where its parent is going to be the data center pod, and maybe this is DC zone, something like that, right? And maybe these are nestable. And what this means is I could have multiple DC zones within other zones. So an example of that would be, I've got like my parent DMZ, and then I've got like different segments of that DMZ that live within there. But I can all specify that those are types of data center zones, right? So that's what that is. And then the content type, as I mentioned, this is going to be the type of data that's in the system. So what I'm saying is that devices can be assigned to this DC zone, but nothing else right now. So maybe also prefixes could be assigned to this DC zone. So in places in the data model where we can attribute physical or logical locations to data, this control specifies what types of data can be assigned to different parts of the location. So we can add constraints to make sure that our users aren't, adding prefixes to places in the hierarchy where we don't want them to, because that would wind up creating data quality issues for us down the road, right? So if I were to create this, then we can see the hierarchy that now exists here, and this, indicates that this is a nestable type. And then, we could create our locations going on from there. And then one of the last things that actually, excuse me, I got a few things, but we'll go talk about the external integration model. So we don't have any instances of this in here today, but we can take a look at the model, and you can get a sense for the fact that this is about basically configuration management for external integrations. So this is, maybe I want a connection to I've got a job that is intending to connect to my internal CMDB. So I got my CMDB there, and it's whatever the base endpoint is for this, something like that. So that's going to be like the base URL for my system, and then I can specify a secrets group. So secrets are the way that we integrate Nautobot with a proper vaulting solution, like maybe HashiCorp Vault or CyberArk or something else like that, right? Where the Nautobot system is not having to store the secret data like usernames and passwords within our database. We offload that into a proper enterprise platform for vaulting management, and then we just reference that data here in the form of a secrets group. So that is some of the external integrations that can come out of the box with Nautobot in enterprise environments that are interested in that kind of thing, right? So an example for this would be, maybe I've got a API token or API credentials for this system. I would store those in my vaulting solution and then reference them here for proper consumption. And then extra config, I can, throw headers or, things like that in here as well. And then I would reference this external integration in something like my job input or an SSoT configuration or something like that, right? But the last thing I'll show is, let's take a look at the way that we do export capabilities. So got my device list here. Let's just filter this down for all of my AMS devices. So if we look here, we've got 27 devices total that match that filter. We click the export button here. We're going to get shifted over to a new view here, which is called the job results. So this indicates that we have kicked off a job to go and export our devices. And this is already completed. There were just 27 records here, but we can see that we have a file that we can now download. If you click on that, obviously you can go to download that information. But what's nice about this running in the background is for those larger data sets or whatnot that might take some time to generate and export, I can go off and do something else and not worry about this. And this gives an example of what this would look like for another type of job that a job author could create that would generate any sort of file that you want. It doesn't have to be CSV, right? It can be any type of file, maybe device configuration, for instance. And then be able to have that associated with the job results, and then users can download that file from the UI. And administrators of the system, platform administrators, system administrators do have a number of options on the back end for how the mechanics of this work, right? If you're familiar with the Nautobot architecture, these jobs are run within what we call workers, which can be on the same box as the Nautobot instance that's serving this web traffic, or it can be on many different boxes throughout the network that are servicing distributed workloads and so forth. So there's a number of options that administrators have for making sure that these files can operate within that architecture in a number of ways, whether that be S3 type storage or shared file systems and so forth, or there are database options for simpler use cases and so forth as well too. So a number of ways to achieve that. So that is all that I have for the demo here. So at this time, I will hand it over to Jeremy to MC any Q&A that we might have.
Awesome. So one good question that we had come in is going to be around restructuring my location data. So if I've got a set of locations that are already existing, then I've also got sites and regions, like how does that all kind of come together in Nautobot V2? And do I have to do anything in that process?
Yeah, so if the question is about worrying about the migration of the existing data that I've got, right? I've got a lot of location data that exists in sites and regions. The point that I've tried to reiterate throughout the whole presentation here again is that you don't need to worry about your data coming over from Nautobot 1. We are taking care of that for you as a part of the upgrade into 2, even though there's some pretty significant changes to the network source of truth data model underneath the hood here. So your existing region hierarchy that you may have created, whether it was flat hierarchy or 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever, however many layers nested deep, we will actually wind up recreating the essence of that hierarchy in the location types and then move the data over. So you actually have a very similar, pretty much exactly the same hierarchy that you had before. You will have location types for region and a location type for site out of the box when you do a migration. Then obviously, if you're doing a brand new install of Nautobot, you'll be able to create whatever you want out of the box. And then obviously those that are upgrading from 1.0 at that point could then go and manipulate that hierarchy as they see fit.
Sweet. One question that I answered in the Q&A, but I think it's a good discussion point, is around the functionality that we had in the version control app, and kind of what are we thinking about at this point in time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great point. So we have made some public demos and so forth. There is a project that is out there kind of in an alpha state at this point for version control based on the DOLT database backend. We are making some significant effort and strides in coming up with the strategy for that going forward. So please note it's not a lost project or anything like that. We are actively working on its future, and we do hope to have some plans to share for that in the new year.
Sweet. Another one that I answered in chat, but a good thing just to kind of talk live about, is around, hey, I've got all these Nautobot apps that I've done custom development on, and I see the cool stuff in 2.1. Do I need to do anything to have them work and look and feel like the rest of 2.1?
Yeah, great question. So we got some information on kind of the exit slide here for today, but we do have some extensive documentation basically servicing two different kind of paradigms, right? There's the system administrator that wants to upgrade my Nautobot instance. And then there's a whole nother set of documentation for I'm an app developer or a plugin author, and I want to make sure that my apps or my jobs are compatible with 2.0 moving forward. Mm-hmm. So we do have pretty extensive documentation on the types of changes, the specific things that you'll need to do and look out for to make your code compatible.
For sure. So basically, if we're on 2.0 already, we've done that migration heavy work. Going to 2.1, it's I get all the bells and whistles from the UX stuff for free, and I don't have to do anything. But mm-hmm. There may be some lifting going from the 1x to 2.0 when it comes to my custom apps.
Mm-hmm. And you can definitely look to the network to code sponsored open source projects, all of those apps to get a feel for what's going to be involved there. Obviously it's going to be context specific. Certain apps aren't going to require very much. If you heavily use some of the features that have been changed, obviously there's going to be a little bit of effort there. But we do have good documentation on all of that, and definitely some patterns that you can look to in the existing work that has been migrated.
Very good. So I've got two questions now on the IPAM realm. Mm-hmm. I think they kind of build on each other. So the first one is, in the new IPAM modeling, how do we handle redundant virtual IP addresses? So think of maybe like TSLBs or something to that effect, as an example. Mm-hmm. Where that, two routers sharing the same IP.
Sure. Yeah, so that is actually an excellent point. We introduced a feature actually back in Nautobot 1 that is largely unchanged in Nautobot 2, so no worries on upgrade or anything like that, called interface redundancy groups. And those mm-hmm. also went hand in hand with another feature called device redundancy groups, but this is the ability to assign redundant context to a set of interfaces, in this case, that would commonly be used for those types of next hop redundancy protocols. and so forth. And then, as I mentioned, also depending on the use case, things like simple anycast things, the ability to assign a single IP address across multiple interfaces may also service those types of needs as well. But if you want to track the redundant priority nature of a set of interfaces across devices, that would be interface redundancy groups. And then, of course, you have the ability to assign the virtual addresses to those groups.
Awesome. So point of clarity, it sounds like there's some stuff in 1X that late 1X releases that gave some good functionality, but then it's also kind of teeing off the anycast. It sounds like one thing that'll help as well is the ability to assign the same exact instance of an IP to multiple interfaces, and not just doing one IP and you have to duplicate the IP and assign it and so forth. Does that sound right?
Exactly.
Cool. Awesome. So in that vein of duplicate IP space features, the question we got is around the find and merge duplicate IP features. Are there any safeguards in place that allow you to say, hey, click this button, can I review what's about to get squashed together, or what kind of happens?
Yeah, absolutely. So what that tool is going to do, and I think we can take this as feedback, as maybe we want to do a kind of an individual presentation on that, because there's a lot of nuance in that tool that we could go through. But it's going to walk you through the step of migrating sets of IP addresses together. So the wholesale operations, the ones that are simple that can be identified, those we're doing for you automatically. And what this tool is for the cases where we don't want to make those assumptions for you. We want to walk you through that process and give you the options to say, okay, the description from this address is the correct one. But the location assignment for this one is better, and so forth, right?
Okay, makes sense. Well, I think that's all that I have in the Q&A section and discussion points.
Okay. All right, so we'll go through the conclusion here. So, thanks everyone for participating today. So some great questions in the Q&A, and as again, just a kind of a wrap up here. What we went through in Nautobot V2 was definitely the most significant development effort we've had thus far. We've got a number of user-facing features that should be very helpful in a number of situations in modeling modern networks. And those are listed here. Again, the generic role model, these significant changes to the IPAM data model, improvements to the way that we track locations, all of the work that is existing and is coming up in our roadmap for data import and export. And then the pretty big effort that you'll notice within 2.1 for the improved UI, and then all of the other stuff that I mentioned as well for jobs and so forth. But again, 2.0 is kind of a foundational set of changes that we've made within Nautobot to set up our teams internally to be able to more quickly deliver solutions in the future as well. So what can you do now? So go upgrade your Nautobot instances, right? But if you're not quite ready to do that, we do have a sandbox available. That is actually the instance that I was doing the demo out of today. It is next.demo.nautobot.com. The next part of that is specific. That is going to land you on the 2.1 release. If you go to just demo.nautobot.com, that will take you to the 2.0 release. Much of what I mentioned today, of course, what we went through is available in that 2.0 release. But if you want the latest and greatest, what is going to be there, if you were to do the effort to go through an upgrade or are looking to do a new Nautobot deployment, by the end of the year, 2.1 will be out, and that would be this next.demo.nautobot.com sandbox. The migration instructions specific to upgrading an instance can be located at docs.nautobot.com, and the path to get there, you follow the links to get to the core docs and the user guide, and then the administration upgrading guide. So that'll be for system administrators how to upgrade an instance. And then also within docs.nautobot.com, you can find the developer documentation. And within the developer documentation is the specific sections on how to care about migrating your apps and jobs for 2.0 compatibility. And just a quick note, Network to Code is your source for network automation solution services, and we do a great deal of professional services work within the industry. But we also have paid support options for Nautobot. So if that is something that your organization is interested in, please reach out. And also specific to that, if you are an existing customer and you would like some help with looking at an upgrade to 2.0, please look out, please reach out. We do have some specific options available there as well. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Jeremy. And we appreciate it. And we will be back with another webinar here soon. And I will hand it back over to Jeremy to close us out.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And very much appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today on Nautobot V2 to see all the fun stuff that's out and the fun stuff that's coming out in Nautobot 2.1. Just to say it again, if you need anything, you want a personalized demonstration or inquiry, please feel free to reach out via the info@networkscode.com. Always happy to set something up and work with our sales team in that scenario. On that note, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day, wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next time. Same bat place, same back time.